So here's a quick summary of Chapter 1 of the Lean Startup. In this chapter, Eric Ries justifies why the Lean Startup approach is so important in today's world of startups. And that is because the Lean Startup helps fix the problem of building something that nobody wants. Now, the reason why this happens with a lot of startups is because a lot of startups, they think that the problem they're dealing with when it comes to producing a product that people want is it's all about having clarity on what to build and then building it as quickly as possible. Now, the problem with that is that ignores the fact that a startup operates in an area of high uncertainty. You don't know what your customers want. You might not even know who your customers are. Now, the way to overcome this uncertainty and then eventually build something that people want is to build very iteratively. The analogy that Eric Ries makes to show the difference between the traditional approach of building something and the Lean Startup approach is he talks about driving a car versus launching a rocket. Launching a rocket requires a very clear roadmap and a very clear understanding of the different moving parts of the rocket. Every little process needs to be calibrated, and there has to be just far more structure to the launching process of a rocket versus, say, driving a car, where although you know your destination, you might not be able to specifically say every single little operation that you run in order to drive a car. That is more of a fitting approach to building a startup because while you should have a destination in mind, you should have some sort of North Star metric to track, you shouldn't be fussing over little details like what exactly to do when it comes to marketing, what exactly to do when it comes to operations. Instead, you should be building, measuring, and learning. You should be building something, testing the assumptions behind what you've built, and then measuring the feedback that you get, and then learning from that feedback. Now, why this isn't really accepted in many companies is because that process can be very frustrating. That process of building, measuring, and learning can be extremely frustrating because you will be wrong many, many times over. But Eric Ries' argument is that these failures, these lapses in product development, they are what allow you to go down the right path, to go down the path of building something that people actually want instead of building something that nobody wants on time and with minimum resources. What's important is to test quickly, to run experiments, to try to test your understanding of your users, and to be constantly running these product experiments, these hypotheses that you have about your users and about the product features that you've developed. It's intangible at the start because you're not exactly just building things out. You're not building features. Features feel tangible. The progress that comes from building a feature can be quantified. But let's say you build something and then it's completely wrong as part of the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Now that doesn't feel tangible. That feels like you've lost something. But in the Lean Startup approach, it's so essential to do that because that's how you know that you're on the wrong path. And then you steer slightly, like you're driving a car. You steer slightly. If you're on the wrong path and you start to get signs that you're on the wrong path, maybe you see like some road sign that doesn't really correspond to the route you're trying to take towards your destination, then maybe you start steering in another direction. You take like a different road. And that's exactly what you should do when you're developing a product. You shouldn't try to run straight for it, to try to launch this rocket, to try to plot everything out very clearly and very, very concretely. No, you should instead have a very clear picture of the experiments you're running and then try to iterate, try to feel for the feedback that you're getting and then steer the car, which is your product, if the feedback that you're getting is not great, which is the learn aspect of the Lean Startup. And Eric Ries' final argument in the whole chapter is that by taking this iterative approach of build, measure, learn, instead of just trying to churn out as many units of whatever product you've decided on as quickly as possible, which is what traditional manufacturing tries to do, which is batch production really, you should be taking the iterative approach. And he thinks that by iterating, many startups can avoid the outcome of failure. So that's it for chapter 1 of the Lean Startup, and I think it's extremely important that you read this chapter to get an understanding of what exactly the whole Lean Startup process is all about. It's really just a process of experimenting with the product features you've decided to develop and really questioning the assumptions you've made about your users and developing certain product features to test. That's what really the Lean Startup is about. It's more of an experiment-driven sort of product development philosophy rather than a set in stone, this is what you build for your users sort of philosophy. It's all about being agile, about being just flexible with the product development process. And just one final point. Progress is learning about your users, learning about their likes, their dislikes, what they want to see in a product. You can only do that by observing user behavior. Now, the way to not measure progress is to measure how quickly you build certain features. That's not as important as learning from the feedback that you get from your users in response to whatever you've built.